There are days when life feels like a weight pressing against your chest, quietly, persistently, without needing a reason. Nothing has gone wrong, not exactly, but there's a dull ache under your ribs, a heaviness you can't quite name. You wake up with it, carry it through your routines. Let it sit beside you as you drink your coffee or scroll through your phone. It follows you into conversations, into quiet moments alone, into the spaces where no one sees you. And when night falls and the world goes quiet, it's still there. That unspoken ache, that sense that something inside you wants to be heard, to be seen, to be held. But you don't know what it is. You only know that it's yours, that it has been waiting for your attention patiently for longer than you care to admit, and so you finally stop. Not because you have answers, but because you're tired of running, tired of pretending that the ache isn't real, tired of distracting yourself with noise and movement and other people's problems. You sit down, maybe in the middle of your bedroom floor, maybe in your car with the windows rolled up, maybe on the edge of your bed in the dark, and you breathe. Not the kind of breath that sustains the body, but the kind that reaches down into the soul. The kind of breath that says, I'm here now. I'm ready to listen. At first, there's only silence, a thick, uncomfortable silence that you've avoided for so long it feels foreign. But then slowly, something stirs. A thought, a memory, a feeling you've buried under layers of productivity and performance. Maybe it's grief, maybe it's fear, maybe it's a longing you never allowed yourself to name. And in that moment, something inside you breaks open, not in a destructive way, but in a way that feels strangely holy, like the cracking of a shell so that the light can get in. You don't run, you don't try to fix it, you don't try to understand it. You just let it rise, let it speak. Let it move through you like a storm that has been waiting on the horizon for years. And as it does, something else begins to happen. You feel the tension start to loosen, you feel your breath deepen, you feel the tears, not the loud, performative kind, but the soft, trembling kind that comes from deep within the heart. And for the first time in a long time, you feel real. Not okay, not put together, not impressive, but real. And in being real, you remember something you had forgotten, something this world rarely tells you. You don't have to have it all figured out. You don't have to always be strong. You don't have to pretend that your heart isn't heavy or your spirit isn't weary. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to rest. It's okay to feel lost, to fall apart, to not know the way forward. Because healing doesn't happen in the pretending, it happens in the truth. And your truth, it's not something you have to search for. It's not something you have to earn. It's already inside you, waiting for permission to speak. And now that you've stopped long enough to listen, it speaks not in sentences or declarations, but in sensations. In the way your body relaxes when you let go of the pressure to be more. In the way your chest softens when you stop holding your breath. In the way your shoulders drop when you release the weight of everyone else's expectations. You start to see that healing isn't about becoming someone else. It's about unbecoming, about shedding the masks, the roles, the identities you wore to survive. It's about coming home to the parts of you that were pushed aside, the parts that never got a chance to speak. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. And that remembering, it's not a one-time event. It's not a moment of enlightenment that changes everything. It's a slow, sacred unfolding, a daily practice of choosing presence over performance, of choosing softness over shame, of choosing to sit with your pain instead of numbing it, of choosing to stay when everything in you wants to leave. You begin to notice the patterns, the old stories that still echo in your mind, the ones that tell you you're too much or not enough or too broken to be whole. And instead of fighting them, you meet them with compassion. You ask, where did you come from? Whose voice are you echoing? And as you ask, you begin to see that these stories are not yours. They were passed down, inherited, imprinted. They were survival strategies, not truths. And now that you see them for what they are, you can begin the slow, brave work of rewriting them. You start by speaking differently to yourself, not with perfection, but with intention. You replace the harshness with gentleness. You replace the judgment with curiosity. You start saying things like, I'm doing the best I can. I don't have to have all the answers. It's okay to take this one breath at a time. And in that shift, something inside you begins to soften. The inner critic gets quieter. The inner child starts to feel safe. And your heart, once hardened by years of defense, begins to open. And in that opening, you begin to see the world differently. Not as a place you have to conquer, but as a place you get to experience. Not as a battlefield, but as a classroom. Not as something outside of you, but as something that reflects what's within. You notice the way the wind brushes against your skin. You notice the way the light shifts as the day moves forward. You notice the way your breath feels like a prayer when you're fully present. These moments don't fix everything. They don't erase your pain, but they remind you that life is still here, still waiting, still holding beauty, even in the midst of the ache. And so you begin to move through your days differently, not with urgency, but with reverence. You stop rushing, you stop forcing, you stop trying to keep up with a world that thrives on speed and scarcity. You start choosing what feels aligned. You start saying no to things that drain you. You start saying yes to things that bring you back to yourself. And in doing so, you begin to build a life that feels like home. Not a perfect life, not a life without struggle, but a life rooted in truth. A life that holds space for the full spectrum of your humanity. A life where you are allowed to feel and rest and begin again. A life where your worth is not based on how much you produce, but on the simple fact that you exist. And that existence, it's sacred. You begin to realize that you are not here to be fixed. You are here to be felt, to be held, to be whole, and you already are. There's something that begins to change inside of you when you stop demanding clarity from the future and start making peace with the uncertainty of the present. You realize that maybe the answers aren't supposed to come all at once, and maybe the path ahead isn't meant to be mapped out with sharp lines and perfect timing. You start to understand that this moment, this single breath, this quiet second of existence is where your life is actually happening. It's not waiting for you down the road when things are finally in place, when the pain is finally gone, when you've achieved enough or become enough or healed enough. It's here, in the tremble of your hands as you write your thoughts down for the first time in months, in the way your eyes blur with tears when a memory surfaces you thought you'd forgotten, in the way your chest rises and falls as you try to sit still with emotions you've always tried to outrun. Life doesn't wait for perfection. It moves through you in your rawest, most uncertain state, asking only that you meet it where you are, not where you think you should be. And when you stop waiting for life to begin, when you stop putting off your own peace until you're more worthy, more ready, more whole, you find that the life you've been longing for has already been whispering to you all along. It's in the quiet moments that never made it to your highlight reel. It's in the messy conversations, the half-finished journal entries, the awkward silences that followed your most honest words. It's in the loneliness that wrapped around you like a second skin and taught you how to be your own companion. It's in the mistakes that unraveled you and forced you to sit with the version of yourself you didn't know how to love yet. All of it, the softness, the suffering, the longing, the learning, it was never a detour. It was the path, the exact one you were meant to walk. And on that path, you begin to strip away everything that was never truly you. Not suddenly, not without grief, but slowly, intentionally, like unwrapping a gift that's been sitting in your soul, waiting patiently for you to remember it was always there. You take off the roles you were told to play, the masks you wore to be accepted, the layers of protection you built around your heart when the world didn't know how to handle your depth. You stop trying to be digestible. You stop apologizing for your voice, your volume, your silence, your sorrow. You let yourself be seen, not just the version that smiles politely and says all the right things, but the version that shakes when speaking the truth, that cries for no reason, that laughs too loud, that loves too much. And as you let yourself be seen, you begin to see yourself with new eyes, not as a problem to solve, but as a story unfolding in divine timing. You realize that self-love is not a destination, but a daily devotion. It's not found in grand declarations or perfectly curated routines, but in the quiet decisions you make every day to stay with yourself. When you choose to rest instead of pushing through the exhaustion. When you feed your body because it deserves nourishment, not punishment. When you say no to something that drains you, even when it's easier to say yes. When you speak kindly to yourself in the mirror, even when the old thoughts rise like ghosts. These moments might seem small, but they are acts of rebellion in a world that profits off your self-doubt. They are the rituals through which you reclaim your power, not from anyone else, but from your own patterns of self-abandonment. And yes, there will be days when you forget. Days when the old wounds feel fresh, when the noise in your head drowns out the softness of your heart. There will be moments when you reach for your old coping mechanisms, not because you're weak, but because they were once your lifeline. But even in those moments, you are not lost. You are remembering. Remembering how to come home to yourself, how to breathe through the tightness, how to anchor into the truth that healing isn't a straight line, and neither are you. You are a spiral, a constellation, a wave constantly in motion. You are allowed to ebb and flow, to rise and fall, to fall apart and come back together again, as many times as it takes. And as you live in that rhythm of falling and rising, of remembering and forgetting, you begin to find beauty in your own impermanence. You stop clinging to the idea of being fixed because you realize you were never broken. You were responding, adapting, surviving. You were doing what you needed to do to protect yourself, to make it through. And now with gentleness, you can thank those parts of you. You can say, you kept me safe. You helped me survive, and now I'm ready to thrive. You don't shame the parts of you that coped, you honor them. And in doing so, you set them free. You set yourself free. You begin to live differently, not because you've arrived somewhere, but because you're no longer trying to escape. You walk slower. You listen more deeply. You allow silence in conversations. You welcome pauses in your day. You find richness in the moments that once felt empty, because now you're present enough to feel them. You let yourself be moved by music, by poetry, by the sound of rain on your window. You stop looking for meaning in things that glitter and start finding it in things that glow, softly, steadily from within. And you stop waiting to be chosen. You stop needing to be validated. You stop outsourcing your worth to people who haven't learned how to love themselves, let alone love someone like you. You choose yourself, not because no one else will, but because you've realized that being chosen by others is meaningless if you haven't chosen yourself first. You become your own home, your own sanctuary, your own safe place. And from that place, you begin to build a life that feels like belonging. Not because everyone understands you, but because you do. You laugh more freely now, not because life has stopped being hard, but because you've stopped letting it harden you. You cry more openly, not because you're broken, but because your heart is open enough to feel. You rest more often, not because you're lazy, but because you no longer associate your worth with your productivity. You forgive more quickly, not because what happened was okay, but because you're no longer willing to carry pain that doesn't belong in your future. You love more deeply, not because it's safe, but because love is what you were made for. And in loving this way, in loving yourself and the world from a place of wholeness instead of lack, you begin to heal in ways you didn't know were possible. You start attracting relationships that feel like resonance instead of repair. You stop performing intimacy and start experiencing it. You stop chasing closure and start creating peace. You stop asking, what do I need to fix about myself? And start asking, what do I need to forgive? This is the quiet revolution, the slow, sacred uprising of your soul. It doesn't need to be broadcast. It doesn't need to be understood by everyone. It just needs to be lived, felt, honored. It is yours and yours alone. A map etched into your bones, guiding you back to the truth you've always known. That you are not too much, that you are not behind, that you are not unlovable, that you are not broken. You are healing, you are growing, you are remembering. And in that remembering, you are becoming. Not someone new, not someone better, but someone real. There is a certain softness that begins to return to your life when you stop holding your breath, waiting for something outside of you to give you permission to exhale. It doesn't come with a grand realization or a lightning bolt of clarity. It arrives quietly, like the way morning sunlight spills across your room, before you even open your eyes. It comes after all the forcing, all the fixing, all the trying so desperately to hold everything together. It comes when you finally allow yourself to fall apart. Not in shame, but in grace. You begin to understand that maybe you were never meant to carry all that weight. Maybe the expectations that crushed your shoulders were never really yours. Maybe the life you were taught to chase isn't the one your soul came here to live. And in that stillness, when you stop running, stop proving, stop apologizing for the very shape of your being, you begin to remember how to breathe in your own skin, not as a concept, not as something you practice to be calm, but as a living, sacred act of returning to your body. You realize that your breath has always been your anchor, your most loyal companion, the part of you that never gave up, even when your mind did. Every inhale, every exhale has been a quiet rebellion against despair. And now, as you breathe intentionally, you feel your spirit uncoil, like a fist unclenching after years of bracing for impact. Your body, which you once ignored or criticized or tried to escape, starts to feel like a place you can live in again. You notice its wisdom, the way it trembles when you're near truth, the way it tenses when something is off, the way it softens when you're safe. You stop treating your body like an enemy and start listening to it like a trusted friend. You ask it what it needs, not just when it's in pain, but every day. You offer it nourishment. Not because you're chasing an ideal, but because you're learning what it means to care. You move it not to punish, but to celebrate. You rest it not because you've earned rest, but because you're no longer waiting for permission to exist fully and without apology. And through that reconnection with your body, you find something even deeper, your presence. Not the kind you force when trying to impress someone, but the kind that hums quietly from within. The kind that doesn't need attention to feel valuable. The kind that says, "This moment matters, even if no one is watching." You start to live in your life instead of around it. You taste your food. You feel the water on your skin in the shower. You hear the birds in the morning. You hold eye contact with people you love and let it linger. You slow down enough to hear the unspoken, to feel the spaces between words, to honor silence not as emptiness, but as presence. And in all of that presence, you start to feel joy again. Not the high energy, performative joy, but the kind that wraps around you like a favorite blanket. The kind that doesn't ask for anything in return. The kind that says, "I'm here whenever you're ready." You find it in the way the sunlight warms your skin, in the smell of something baking, in the way someone laughs with their whole chest, in the way a song finds you at the exact right moment, in the way your own heartbeat begins to sound like a hymn of survival, of staying, of showing up again and again and again, even when it would have been easier to hide. And yes, there are still hard days. Days when you forget the softness. Days when the fear comes back dressed in old clothes, whispering old lies. Days when you feel like you're slipping into patterns you thought you'd outgrown. But the difference now is you don't shame yourself for it. You don't panic. You don't spiral into a story about failure. You breathe. You pause. You say, "I see you," and then you choose again. That's what healing has given you. Not perfection, but choice. The choice to not abandon yourself. The choice to respond instead of react. The choice to come back to your truth, even when it's inconvenient or uncomfortable or completely counter to what the world tells you should be true. You learn to trust that your inner compass knows more than the noise around you. That your intuition is not just a whisper, it's a lifeline. You begin to orient your life around what feels right, even if it doesn't make sense to anyone else. You leave rooms where your light is dimmed. You speak even when your voice shakes. You change your mind because growth asks you to. You start over not because you failed, but because you outgrew what no longer fit. You become loyal not to who you used to be, but to who you're becoming. And that loyalty to your own evolution becomes the most sacred promise you've ever made. You no longer fear being misunderstood because you understand yourself. You no longer fear being alone because you enjoy your own company. You no longer shrink in the presence of others because you've stopped measuring your value by comparison. You realize that your uniqueness is not something to overcome, it's something to honor. that your sensitivity is not a weakness, it's a superpower. That your dreams are not naive, they are sacred blueprints whispering to you from the future. And as you start honoring those whispers, you begin to build a life from the inside out. Not one built on performance or approval or appearances, but one built on alignment. You stop chasing the things that drain you and start nurturing the things that light you up. You write more, you rest more, you laugh more, you tell the truth, even when it's messy. You stop trying to do what's expected and start doing what's essential. You realize that saying no is not a rejection. It's a declaration of self-trust, and saying yes becomes more powerful. You begin to live as if your presence matters because it does. You begin to love as if your heart was made for it because it was. You begin to heal as if the process is sacred because it is. And that sacredness infuses everything. From the way you make your tea, to the way you hold space for someone else's pain, to the way you look at your reflection and finally see not a project, but a person worthy of kindness, of tenderness, of grace. And as this new way of being becomes your baseline, you start to notice how different the world feels. Not because the world has changed, but because you have. You're no longer rushing past your own life. You're no longer waiting for the future to rescue you. You're here, in this moment, in this body, in this breath. And that presence, that rooted, quiet presence, it becomes your home, your compass, your prayer. It becomes the foundation upon which you build a life that doesn't just look good from the outside, but feels good from the inside. And that, perhaps, is the greatest gift healing offers. Not certainty or clarity or even peace, but presence. The ability to be here, to be you, to be real, and to know in your bones that that is enough. There is something undeniably sacred about reaching a point in your journey where you stop asking, when will I be healed? And start asking, how can I be with myself more gently while I grow? That simple shift in intention changes everything. It untangles you from the grip of pressure, the pressure to be finished, to be better, to be perfect. And it brings you into a deeper presence, a softer acceptance. You start to realize that your healing is not something that happens in the background while you get on with life. It is your life. It's in every breath you take that feels more conscious than the last. It's in every boundary you set even when it's hard. It's in every time you listen to your needs and honor them, even if it disappoints someone else. It's in the way you respond to your own sadness, not by pushing it away, but by making room for it, like you would a beloved guest who needs to be held for a while. And when you begin to see your healing this way, not as a project, but as a relationship, your entire view of yourself begins to soften. You stop demanding progress from your pain. You stop forcing smiles through tears. You stop pretending to be okay when you're crumbling inside, because now you know that pretending is not strength, it's survival, and you've already survived enough. Now you're learning how to live, really live, fully, honestly, deeply. You're learning to embrace the truth of where you are instead of constantly striving for some imagined future version of yourself. And that truth, it's not always pretty. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it's raw, sometimes it's all tangled up in grief and longing and anger and shame, but it's yours, and that makes it beautiful. There's a quiet rebellion in telling the truth about how you feel, in saying, I'm not okay today, and letting that be enough, in not rushing to fix or change it, in not needing to make it sound more palatable for someone else's comfort, in simply being honest. Because the truth is where healing begins. The truth is where you meet yourself. The truth is what holds the light, even when everything feels dark. And when you learn how to sit with the truth, when you stop fearing it, stop dressing it up, stop hiding from it, you start to find freedom. Not the kind of freedom that comes from running away, but the kind that comes from coming home. Coming home to yourself isn't a moment, it's a process. It's a choice you make over and over again, especially when it's hard. It's choosing to turn toward your own heart when everything in you wants to turn away. It's choosing to stay present when the old patterns try to lure you back into numbness or distraction. It's choosing to feel even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Because now you know that feelings are not the enemy. They are messengers, teachers, guides. They are the voice of your inner world, speaking the language of emotion because that's the only way it knows how to get your attention. And when you start to listen, really listen, you begin to understand things about yourself that you never had space to know before. You understand why you pull away when people get too close. You understand why you say you're fine when you're not. You understand why certain words make your chest tighten, why certain places feel like home, why some days the weight of everything hits you all at once. You begin to see the patterns not as flaws, but as evidence of your humanity, of your resilience, of the ways you've tried to protect yourself in a world that didn't always feel safe. And in seeing those patterns, you begin to heal them, not by force, but by compassion. You don't berate yourself for having triggers. You hold space for the younger version of you who didn't have the tools you have now. It's a younger version of you that was once overlooked, misunderstood, dismissed. The anxiety that bubbles up before connection, it's the memory of a time when being seen felt unsafe. You learn to stop fighting these parts. You learn to place your hand on your chest, close your eyes, and whisper gently to the ache inside. I'm here. I hear you, and I'm not leaving. You no longer reject your own complexity. You no longer divide yourself into acceptable and unacceptable pieces. You no longer love only the parts that others find easy to receive. You begin to understand that true love, soul-deep, unconditional, transformative love, starts with acceptance. The kind of acceptance that holds space for your brilliance and your wounds, your courage and your confusion. The kind that doesn't flinch when you're falling apart. The kind that says you're still worthy, even here. And when you practice that kind of love with yourself, something begins to shift on a cellular level. Your nervous system, long attuned to danger, begins to soften into safety. You no longer see the world through the lens of defense. You begin to see through the lens of presence. You realize that safety isn't a place, it's a feeling. And that feeling comes when you stop betraying your own truth just to make others more comfortable. It comes when you say what you really mean, when you let yourself rest, when you trust that your needs matter, when you believe that it's okay to take up space, not because you've earned it, but because you exist. That in itself is enough. You stop performing healing. You stop trying to appear wise or spiritual or over it. You stop posting every breakthrough and let some things be sacred. You start protecting your growth like a tender seedling, not because you're hiding it, but because you've learned that not every sacred thing needs to be seen. Some things grow best in silence. Some truths don't need an audience. They need stillness. They need time. They need you. And in that stillness, you finally meet yourself without distraction. No scrolling, no noise, no escape routes. Just you sitting with your own breath. And in that breath, you find what you were always looking for. Home. Not a place, not a person, but a feeling that lives within you. A rootedness, a belonging, a soft knowing that says, you don't have to run anymore. You begin to see that slowing down isn't laziness, it's presence. That quiet isn't emptiness, it's clarity. That rest isn't indulgence, it's restoration. You stop needing your life to be loud, to be meaningful. You find joy in the ordinary, in making your bed, in lighting a candle, in watching the sky shift from blue to gold, in hearing the sound of your own heartbeat and knowing it's yours. You start living from the inside out rather than the outside in. And the world may not understand. The world might still reward the hustle, the perfection, the curated smile. But you no longer need their understanding. You no longer ask for permission to exist as you are. You've given that to yourself, and that permission changes everything. It redefines how you show up in relationships. You no longer beg for scraps of affection. You no longer contort yourself to fit into someone's idea of who you should be. You don't tolerate being tolerated. You surround yourself with people who see you and celebrate you, not in spite of your depth, but because of it. You learn to let go, not as an act of resignation, but as an act of reverence. You let go of old identities, old stories, old versions of yourself that were rooted in fear and scarcity. You bless them, you thank them, and you release them because you're no longer willing to live a life that keeps you small. You know now that your truth is not too much, your voice is not too loud, your heart is not too tender. You know now that the things that made you feel broken were often just the parts of you that didn't fit into a world that wasn't designed for your wholeness. And as you let go, you begin to trust that what is meant for you will not require you to betray yourself. You stop chasing, you stop proving, you start magnetizing, because now you are aligned, not perfect, not healed in every way, but aligned. And alignment is what draws in the people, the places, the experiences that nourish your soul. You begin to live with intention, not to impress, but to embody. You start choosing things that feel true, even if they scare you. You speak your needs, you honor your boundaries. You give yourself permission to be seen, even when it feels vulnerable, especially then. And when you're seen, truly seen for who you are, not for the role you play or the image you portray, there's a kind of peace that settles into your bones, a quiet exhale that says, yes, this is me. And that kind of authenticity attracts depth. It creates intimacy. It invites connection that doesn't ask you to be anything other than human. And being human, in all its messy, beautiful, you start to find strength in your softness. Not the kind of strength that dominates or controls, but the kind that holds space. The kind that says, I can be with this discomfort. I don't have to numb it. I don't have to run from it. You become the kind of person who can sit in pain without turning it into poison, who can hold grief without collapsing, who can celebrate joy without guilt. You become steady, not because life stops being chaotic, but because you've stopped outsourcing your peace. You stop seeking safety in what is temporary, in likes, in titles, in the illusion of control. You start anchoring yourself in what's eternal, your breath, your presence, your awareness. You know now that healing is not a straight line, that growth is not linear, that your worth was never up for debate. You walk into rooms with your head high and your heart open, not because you're fearless, but because you're faithful. Faithful to your process, faithful to your becoming, faithful to the version of you that is still unfolding. There's a certain grace that emerges when you stop trying to be extraordinary in a world that tells you nothing about being human. It comes not with applause, but in the silence that follows a moment of truth. In that stillness, you find yourself loosening the grip on identities you worked so hard to uphold. Roles you performed so well you nearly forgot they weren't you. You start to question the narratives you inherited, the ones that told you to always be useful, always be strong, always be agreeable. Slowly, you begin to realize that maybe the point of this life isn't to be impressive, but to be whole. Not to gather admiration, but to cultivate authenticity. Not to conquer the world, but to finally come home to yourself and say, this is me, fully, imperfectly, honestly. It's a subtle awakening, this shift. You begin to notice how many of your choices were rooted in fear. Fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, fear of being misunderstood. And as that awareness deepens, you feel the pain of how many times you said yes when you meant no. How many times you smiled to keep the peace when your soul was breaking. How many times you bit your tongue, swallowed your truth, silenced your longing just to remain digestible. And for a while, that grief washes over you like a tidal wave. Not to punish you, but to show you what it costs to deny yourself for so long. But in that grief, something beautiful is born. A fierce kind of self-loyalty, a holy kind of self-trust. You begin to choose yourself, not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Because you finally understand that no amount of external love will ever feel safe if you continue to abandon yourself to receive it. You begin to redefine love, not as a feeling, but as an act, a commitment, a choice to stay with yourself, especially in the moments you've been conditioned to leave. And it's in those moments, the ones that feel the most vulnerable, the most uncertain, that your healing deepens. When the old pattern shows up, whispering that you're too much, too sensitive, too intense, and instead of shrinking, you expand. You breathe. You say, yes, I feel deeply. And that is not a flaw. You stand tall inside the very parts of you once tried to hide. You let your voice tremble and speak anyway. You let your heart crack open and feel anyway. You let your body rest even when the world says you should be grinding. You reclaim your humanity. And as you reclaim it, You stop pretending that healing is linear. You stop presenting yourself as fixed when the truth is you're still unraveling. You begin to live from a place of tenderness, not performance. You let people see you, not just the curated, confident version, but the raw, in-process version. The one who still cries during commercials. The one who gets overwhelmed by noise. The one who's still figuring out what it means to belong to herself fully. And you realize being seen in your vulnerability doesn't make you weak. It makes you free. You find a new rhythm, one that doesn't rush, one that doesn't measure worth in productivity or likes or outcomes, one that honors rest as much as action, silence as much as expression, being as much as becoming. You notice how your breath slows when you speak your truth, how your body softens when you stop fighting it, how your energy rises when you do things that align with your values, your joy, your truth. And in this alignment, you discover that boundaries are not walls, but bridges. Bridges between the life you used to endure and the one you're now choosing. Boundaries become less about saying no to others and more about saying yes to yourself. Yes to peace. Yes to presence. Yes to protection of your spirit. You no longer explain them to people who aren't committed to understanding you. You no longer feel guilty for disappointing others when it means not abandoning yourself. You don't judge yourself for slipping into old habits. You notice and you choose again. You become the person you needed when you were hurting. You offer yourself the presence, the patience, the permission that no one else could give you then. You stop waiting for someone to save you and start realizing that the most powerful healing happens when you choose to show up for yourself again and again. You begin to take responsibility for your own healing, not in a way that shames or burdens you, but in a way that empowers and liberates you. Because now you see that healing is not about erasing the past. It's about rewriting the future. It's about choosing different responses. It's about learning how to self-regulate, how to self-soothe, how to self-validate. It's about recognizing that the way others treat you is not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of their capacity. And it's about deciding that your peace will no longer be held hostage by someone else's chaos. And when you begin to take back that kind of power, not the aggressive, performative kind, but the quiet, rooted kind, you start to see yourself more clearly. You stop looking for your reflection in someone else's approval. You stop trying to shrink yourself to fit into spaces that were never meant to hold your fullness. You start owning your voice, your needs, your dreams. You start taking up space, not because you're trying to prove something, but because you finally believe that you deserve to exist fully and unapologetically. You begin to dream again, not in the way you did before, when your dreams were shaped by what the world told you to want, but in a way that feels deeply, soulfully yours. You dream of simplicity, of peace, of joy that doesn't need to be loud to be real. You dream of mornings where you wake up without dread in your chest, of evenings where you don't need to numb yourself just to rest. You dream of friendships that feel like safe places, of love that feels like home, of work that feels like purpose. And slowly, as you honor those dreams, not by chasing them, but by aligning with them, you start to notice that life begins to feel different, not easier, but more honest, more meaningful, more aligned. You don't need to be healed to live a beautiful life. You just need to be present, to be willing, to be kind to yourself in the moments when it would be easier not to be, to hold your own heart with tenderness, especially when it aches, to remember that your pain is not a punishment, it's a portal, a doorway into deeper understanding, deeper connection, deeper love. And love, real love, starts with you. It starts with the way you talk to yourself when no one is listening. It starts with the way you forgive yourself when you fall short. It starts with the way you choose to believe in your worth even when the world forgets to remind you. It starts with the way you offer yourself grace over and over again until grace becomes your new default instead of guilt. And when love becomes the way you relate to yourself, it changes everything. Not all at once and not in obvious ways, but in subtle, powerful shifts. You start to feel safe in your own body. You start to trust your own timing. You start to let go of people who were never really holding you. You start to create boundaries that protect your peace instead of apologizing for needing them. You start to live in alignment with your truth, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it costs you the approval you once craved. Because now you know the cost of abandoning yourself, and you're no longer willing to pay it. Now you're building a life where you get to stay with yourself, fully, freely, and without shame. And in that life, you are not waiting to be chosen. You have already chosen yourself. There's a moment in every soul's quiet journey where the question shifts from, what do I need to fix? To what am I ready to feel? And that shift, while invisible on the outside, marks a sacred turning within. It's no longer about chasing a better version of yourself. It's not about upgrading or outperforming or transforming to meet the world's definition of wholeness. It becomes about remembering the self that's been underneath all along, the self that was never broken, only buried beneath layers of shame, comparison, and years of trying to survive. You stop seeking healing as a finish line and begin to understand that it's a living relationship, a slow becoming, a deep remembering, a promise to yourself that you'll keep showing up, even if it's messy, even if it's tender, even if it doesn't look like progress to anyone else. And in that sacred space, you begin to see your pain differently, not as something to eliminate, but as something to sit beside. You stop trying to silence the voices in your head and begin to listen, not because they're always true, but because they are speaking from a place that deserves to be acknowledged. The fear that says you're not good enough? You begin to trust that those who are meant to walk beside you will honor your growth, not resent it. You also learn to hold space for duality, for the parts of you that are still healing while other parts are already thriving, for the grief that sits quietly beside your joy, for the loneliness that lingers even in love, for the hope that rises even in pain. You stop trying to sort your life into neat categories. You let it be messy, real, alive. You let your journey be a canvas with rough edges and unfinished strokes, knowing that beauty often comes from what's left unresolved. And in this way of living, you begin to see yourself not as a project to be completed, but as a garden to be tended. You water the parts of you that have gone dry. You pull the weeds of old stories and outdated beliefs. You sit in the soil of your own becoming and trust that something is growing, even if you can't yet see it. You start choosing gentleness over judgment, curiosity over criticism. You ask yourself softer questions. What do I need right now? What's hurting? What's calling me forward? And you wait for the answers without rushing them. There are days when your progress will be invisible, days when the only thing you accomplish is not giving up, days when the most revolutionary thing you do is listen to your body and honor its yes or no. And slowly, you learn to celebrate those days just as much as the ones filled with clarity and motion. You begin to understand that healing is not just what you do in therapy or in journals. It's how you choose to meet yourself moment by moment, with compassion, with care, with the quiet knowing that no step is too small when it's taken in love. And as this becomes your way of living, you begin to radiate a different kind of energy, one that's not trying to prove or persuade, but simply is. You walk into rooms not with armor, but with presence. You speak not to be heard, but to be true. You rest not as a luxury, but as a birthright. You connect not to be completed, but to be witnessed. You move through the world with a softness that no longer feels like weakness, but as your most sacred strength. People may not understand this version of you. Some may say you've changed. Others may miss the version of you who was easier to manipulate, who didn't take up so much space, who said yes even when it hurt. And that will sting at first. The shedding always does. But you'll remember, you didn't come here to make yourself small. You came here to be whole, to live, to feel, to offer your gifts not from a place of depletion, but from overflow. You are no longer here to impress. You are here to embody, to take up the space that is yours without shrinking, to speak with a voice that's rooted in truth, not fear, to love from a heart that has learned how to love itself first. And from that place, everything you touch begins to change, not because you're forcing it, but because your energy now reflects the light you reclaimed from your own shadows. You now walk with the wisdom of someone who's faced the storm and didn't run, who stood in the eye of pain and didn't collapse, who let the rain wash over them without pretending it was sunshine. And because of that, you are softer but stronger, quieter but more clear, still but deeply alive. You carry this softness into everything now. The way you speak to others, the way you hold space for their humanity, the way you no longer rush to fix but instead ask, how can I be here with you? You begin to see that the most healing thing you can offer the world is your own presence, fully rooted, fully open, not perfect, just present. And this presence, cultivated through your healing, becomes your legacy. Not a legacy of titles or accomplishments, but of truth, of tenderness, of someone who dared to live in alignment with her soul, even when it was uncomfortable, even when it was slow, even when no one else understood. This, you realize, is what it means to come home, not to a place, not to a person, but to yourself. And in that unfolding, you find purpose, not in grand achievements, but in small moments of alignment. You find purpose in showing up with integrity, in living your truth, even when it's inconvenient, in being kind not just to others but to yourself. You stop asking, what do I need to do to be valuable? And start asking, how can I honor who I already am? And that question, that sacred inquiry, becomes the compass that guides you home every time you feel lost. Because now you know, healing isn't a destination, it's a relationship. With yourself, with your breath, with the present moment. It's the quiet daily choice to return to your body, to your truth, to your heart, again and again and again. And that return, there's a quiet strength in you now, the kind that doesn't need to announce itself, the kind that doesn't demand recognition. It sits softly in your bones,